In the spring of 1971, a reporter in western Missouri visited an organic farm he had been told about by locals. During his first visit, this reporter interviewed a young woman who called herself Linda Baldwin and a young man named John Weaver who claimed he was from Simi Valley, California. The two agreed to speak to the reporter about their enterprise, Nubian Farms. Linda spoke about growing tomatoes without the use of DDT or chemical pesticides, and about their mission known as Youth for Life, which promoted a philosophy of total acceptance of all churches and beliefs with no prejudice at all. The young people were friendly if reserved. A second woman, Patricia, was less friendly, telling the other two that if the reporter got too nosy, that they should toss him off the property. The reporter, Neil Sheehan, discovered that the property was being leased by one Reverend William R. Cole. Cole, a.k.a. Bill Van Sickle. Later information revealed that Linda was actually Claudia Lee Smith, and Patricia Joan Baldwin, a.k.a. Madeline Cottage, Little Patty. After the first of 4 articles appeared about the farm, local law officials received a phone call from investigators Whiteley and Gunther out in Los Angeles, looking for information on the murders of Gary Hinman and Donald Shorty Shea. On April 19th, Judge Older formally sentenced the killers to death by electrocution. At the time, no death row for female prisoners existed in California, so a special unit was built at the California Institute for Women in Frontera, a specially designed city within the city of Corona, California, in Riverside County. Virginia Graham, Ronnie Howard, and Danny DiCarlo were to split the $25,000 reward put up by actor-director Warren Beatty, Yul Brynner, and others. Stephen Weiss, the youngster who found the gun, was somehow omitted from the reward, and DiCarlo split the scene before he could collect. With the state still building its case against Watson, prosecutors moved forward against Manson, Davis, and Grogan for Gary Hinman and Shorty Shea's murders. These 2 crimes were tried together because, other than Watson, everyone else involved had already been convicted and sentenced or dismissed. Manson, although he already had a death sentence for Tate LaBianca, still had to pay the piper for Hinman Shea. On July 15th, Manson bewilderingly pled guilty to killing Shea, even bragging that he chopped the stuntman's head off. He spoke directly to the judge, who told Manson that he could not accept a guilty plea unless Charlie had a lawyer present. Manson had fired Kanarick for being unwilling to run the case as he saw fit and was between attorneys, so he recanted his guilty plea on the spot. Manson also requested a witness for the trial, an inmate at Folsom Prison named Kenneth Como. Como, aka Curly, was serving time on unrelated matters. As a named witness in a murder trial, he was transported to Los Angeles, where he promptly escaped, fleeing authorities. It was all a ruse. The plan was for Como to break Manson out of the courtroom, but Como never made it that far. Como was born April of 1939 in Morrison, Minnesota. His association with Manson was described by Ed Saunders in a 1976 article in We magazine. When Manson was found guilty, it was reported that he was greatly depressed over impending transfer to death row. Maybe he was projecting his own hostilities over to potential black cellmates, but the story is that he felt in danger because of the racial issues. He was seen practicing karate in the holding tank, preparing in case black Muslims attacked him on the row at San Quentin. Not only had he planned a race war, but he had been convicted of ordering the death of a pregnant woman. Manson negotiated with the anti-black, all-white prison society known as the Aryan Brotherhood to protect him. The Aryan Brotherhood is a whites-only prison gang affiliated with the Aryan Nation, a neo-Nazi white supremacist organization operating throughout the U.S. The Aryan Brotherhood, AB, is involved in many criminal activities within the penal system, including the targeting and murder of Black and Latino prisoners. Kenneth Como was recommended by the Aryan Brotherhood as a strong candidate to organize the family and break Manson out of prison. Manson corresponded secretly with Como, but had not met the younger man before agreeing to the AB's terms. Saunders continued, Manson ordered his remaining family women to send nude photos of themselves to Aryan Brotherhood members in jail. They were apparently to provide sexual and housekeeping favors to Aryan Brotherhood members who left prison. Manson must have thought it was tactically smart to join forces with the Aryan Brotherhood because in addition to his personal safety, he could keep track of wobbling followers on the outside. The move turned out to be a great blunder, however, because the Aryan Brotherhood, particularly Kenneth Como, was subsequently able to split the remnants of the Manson group into two bitter factions. When Como fled from the Hall of Records, he joined the family. Within weeks, he committed armed robbery for his new gang. In August, Patricia Baldwin, Little Patty, aka Madeline Joan Cottage, suffered an emotional breakdown at Nubian Farms in western Missouri. Investigators had been snooping around, and it is alleged that Little Patty burned down a building. Bill Van Sickle contacted Baldwin's parents, who came to the farm and took their daughter away. It is believed that she was hospitalized at a mental health facility in Memphis, Tennessee. Soon, the other occupants of the farm, Cowboy Bill, Claudia Smith, and John Weaver, also fled the scene. They left behind a letter they'd received from an unknown author that read, "That's really something, Patty leaving. I sure as hell hope she keeps her mouth shut. Don't take any chance with Patty. I don't know the whole story, but from what you wrote in the letter, it doesn't sound too safe. You take it easy. Be careful. I don't know what Patty's trip is. Don't take the chance. She could blank you up." A reminder that Little Patty was present at the suicide of John Philip Zero Hott in November 1969, as was Bill Van Sickle. Other remnants left behind when Van Sickle, Smith, and the others departed included a hospital bracelet belonging to a Linda Baldwin, who gave birth a few months before to a baby girl. It is unclear if Claudia's daughter was fathered by Bill or someone else. After Van Sickle and Claudia Smith left Nubian Farms, they returned to California and were married in Ventura County. On August 21st, Como and Dennis Rice led Gypsy, Mary, Little Larry, and Chuck Lovett to the Western Surplus Store in Hawthorne, California. This was an Army-Navy retailer which stocked weapons of many calibers. There they held up staff and customers at gunpoint and gathered more than 140 rifles to be used, ostensibly, to break Manson out of prison. But someone tripped a silent alarm, bringing police to the scene. A shootout began, and when it was over, both Mary and Gypsy were wounded, and everyone was arrested with the exception of 19-year-old Lovett, who managed to flee undetected. Charles Chuck Lovett, a.k.a. Chuckleberry, was born January 1952. He was one of those new followers who saw or read about the trials and decided to join up. He appeared with the family at Spawn Ranch in the pages of Life magazine, a staged shoot in and around the infamous Wave Cave. Lovett was also among those featured in the film Manson, the tall, good-looking kid with straight dark hair. He was captured a few weeks after the Hawthorne shootout. The robbers planned to steal the rifles, use them to break Manson out of jail, then hijack a plane to fly him out of the country. They also robbed a store in Covina a week earlier, making off with $2,600 in cash. Instead, more members of the family were facing incarceration. On August 24, 1971, Charles Watson's trial for the Tate LaBianca murders finally began. One of the first witnesses was Barbara Hoyt. After the attempt on her life nearly a year before, she was no longer afraid. Barbara became one of the most dedicated anti-Manson family advocates. While it's understandable that she felt betrayed by her friends and clearly suffered at their hands, many people believe that she became a zealot in her efforts to put and to keep the killers behind bars. Vincent Bugliosi was again lead prosecutor. I was relatively sure that Watson was going to plead not guilty by reason of insanity and put on a psychiatric defense. Even though defense attorney Sam Bubrick told me that Watson intended to take the stand and confess, I knew I still had to present a strong case during the guilt phase, since it was a safe bet that Watson's testimony would be self-serving. 2, I had to prove, by evidence such as Watson's instructing Linda to steal the $5,000, that although Watson was dominated by Manson, he still had enough independence to make him legally responsible for his acts. One of the key issues during the guilt trial, then, was whether Watson was suffering from diminished mental capacity at the time of the murders. If he was, and it was of such a nature that it prevented him from deliberating and premeditating, the jury would have to find the chief Tate LaBianca killer guilty of second rather than first-degree murder. Watson behaved vastly different in court than Charlie. In an obvious attempt to project a college boy image, Watson dressed very conservatively in court. Short hair, shirt and tie, blue blazer, slacks. But he still looked strange. His eyes were glassy and never seemed to focus. He reacted not at all to the damning testimony of such witnesses as Linda Kasabian, Paul Watkins, Brooke Poston, and Diane Lake, and his mouth was always slightly gaping, giving him the appearance of being mentally retarded. Taking the stand on direct examination by the defense, Tex played the part of Manson's abject slave. He admitted shooting or stabbing 6 of the Tate LaBianca victims, but denied stabbing Sharon Tate. Everything would show to either premeditation or deliberation he put on Manson or the girls. My cross-examination so shook Tex that he often forgot he was supposed to be playing the idiot. By the time I'd finished, it was obvious to the jury that he was in complete command of his mental faculties, and probably always had been. Eventually, Bugliosi got Watson to admit that he alone stabbed Sharon. That September, Manson set fire to his jail cell. His reach was growing shorter. Others, like Como and Dennis Rice, were now in control of his family, and new members were joining like Lovett and Maria Alonso, who never knew what life was like with Charlie. Alonso, a.k.a. Crystal, was born in '51 in New York. She met Susan Atkins at Sybil Brand, who gave her glowing reports about Charlie. Maria later joined the family and was among the women who served as comfort aides to the Aryan Brotherhood. Sandy and Squeaky were still Charlie's most vocal supporters. After the convictions, Sandy told the press they didn't want to face the fact that their products, their children, would do this. They didn't want to hear our reasons. At Frontera, Susan, Leslie, and Patricia were still under Manson's control. It took years for each of them to break away and to see their time with the family in the light of the truth. Strangely, Susan was the first. Virginia Carlson, superintendent of California's Institute for Women, observed by the summer of 1971 that Susan appears more isolated and lonely than her 2 co-defendants. She has more artwork in her room than the other 2 women and has selected pictures which are both sensitive and sentimental. Psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors at CIW found Susan to be pleasant, friendly, without verbal manipulations, and sincere. She was adjusting to prison, but iced out by Leslie and Pat, who were angered that she'd helped them get locked up, awaiting their death sentences. That July, Atkins asked for a Bible and spoke with the prison chaplain. She also volunteered to clean the security area where prisoners met with family and counsel. But Susan had few visitors those early years. Her time in the special unit was largely spent alone, wrestling with her thoughts. Leslie's break from Manson began with visits from her folks. At first, it was a struggle to connect. Leslie was so weirdly out of touch with reality, Mrs. Van Houten felt as though she was visiting a mental patient. As a way to reorient her to her past, she brought boxes of family photos and asked Leslie to help her put them in albums. I'd say, "Leslie, do you remember what we were doing there? Where were we? Wasn't that a picnic?" And this stimulated extended conversations about each family member and memories Leslie had about her childhood. Mrs. Van Houten was so determined to do everything she could to reintegrate Leslie into the family, she agreed to include Mr. Van Houten in an overnight visit. For a brief time, they were a family again, cooking, talking, playing cards and board games. Given how much acrimony there had been, a testament to how much they both loved their daughter. It took many months of these visits for Leslie to begin to return to the person she had been pre-family. For Patricia Krenwinkel, it took longer. Her older sister died of a heroin overdose during the early months of the trial. Pat was not able to mourn Charlene's death, and her mother only visited occasionally from Alabama. Her father did what he could for his surviving daughter, believing that she, too, was fated for an early death. On October 12, 1971, Charles Tex Watson was convicted for the murders of the LaBiancas, for Sharon Tate, Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger, Jay Sebring, and Stephen Parent. He was sentenced to death. Watson took the stand during his trial. After some probing, he admitted his role in the deaths of each of his victims. But he was also asked by Leslie's counsel to tell the truth about her actions, that she stabbed Rosemary LaBianca after Tex killed the woman only because he ordered her to do so. Watson refused to answer. In prison, he allegedly told a fellow inmate, "If I brought that kind of attention down on me, I'd never get out. No way am I going to blow my chance to get out just to testify on Leslie Van Houten's behalf." 8 days after Watson's conviction, Kenneth Como escaped from jail again. He sawed through the bars on his 13th floor window in jail, climbed down several stories using a sheet rope, and, I kid you not, crashed through the ceiling of the courtroom where just a year earlier Manson was being tried for the Tate LaBianca murders. Como raced to the street where Sandy Good was waiting. She crashed her vehicle during the getaway and was apprehended by police. Sandy was arrested on the spot. Como managed to flee police and remained at large for several hours before he, too, was taken into custody and returned to maximum security. In November, Manson, Bruce, and Steve Grogan were tried for their roles in the Shea and Hinman murders. As a reminder, Tex participated in the murder of Donald Shorty Shea, but was not tried for that crime. Manson received a second death sentence for him and Shea. Davis also was sentenced to death. Grogan was sentenced to die, but the judge changed the sentence to life, claiming he was the most under the spell of Manson.